Hi everyone, let's talk about Chapter 8, the environmental context of health. So, environmental health explores everything within our physical environment. So, where we live, where we work, where we play, and all of the contributing factors in our environment. What we're using to build our buildings, whether it's our homes, our offices, where our food comes from, where our water comes from, what kind of quality our water has, air quality, commute times and routes. It can identify certain risk factors for chronic diseases. Big one in the Treasure Valley is going to be asthma. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on in this slideshow presentation. And we do know for a fact that our overall environment can have a serious impact on our health. So, that being said, there are other issues that can contribute to environmental health. Think about geography. We talked a little bit about the different cultures just within the United States geographically. So think about those geographic environmental factors within the United States and even globally, whether it's air quality, drinking water, sanitation. Also, think about things like ultraviolet rays, skin cancer incidents. Again, I'm going to talk about this probably a little bit more in the slideshow, but because of our particular altitude, and let's look at places like Denver, Colorado, much higher risk of exposure to ultraviolet rays just based on elevation. Also, consider dust and wind, insects. All of these play a part in environmental health. So, home environment. Now, obviously, most of us live in an area in which we don't have to worry about asbestos or lead paint. However, there's other things that should be a concern. Electrical wiring. If you're living in an older home, perhaps the wiring is not up to code. Poor insulation. That is what keeps us cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Lack of window screens, preventing insects from entering. These are things that actually those of us with a home have to worry about. However, there's many, many people, even within the Treasure Valley, that don't have to worry about this because they don't have a home to live in. They're worried about actually finding a safe place to live. They're living in cardboard boxes, shanties, or hastily built shelters that contain hazardous materials and objects. I'm not sure how many of you have traveled overseas and seen different cultures and different environments in which their building codes, I guess building codes don't even exist, and buildings or shelters, so to speak, are made out of whatever they can find. So, of course, they're not going to be the safest. They may not contain safe materials. There may be asbestos panels that they're using, sharp metal roofing materials. So, something to kind of take into consideration there that we have it pretty darn lucky where we're at. So, moving on to drinking water, and I love that so many of you have chosen to address this particular topic in your global health issues and ethics paper. Drinking water is a huge, huge factor in environmental health. So, we need to look at where's our water coming from? How's it being treated? What's being added to it? A lot of places add fluoride and other additives. Where I live, I have well water. It I don't think it tastes good. My husband thinks it tastes great, but it contains a very high level of mineralization, a lot of iron. So to me, it tastes very minerally. It's actually, I've had to, little too much information here, but I'm at an age where I color my hair and I can't do anything like highlights because my hair actually rusts from the amount of iron and chemicals in my water. So, anyone who lives in Boise, do you know where most of your water comes from? I will answer that question if you ask. So, sanitation, again, something we take for granted. We have the ability to use the restroom in a safe and private manner. Um, the disposal of human excreta, urine and feces, um, is what we're referring to when we talk about sanitation. And a lot of countries, a lot of poorer countries, don't have access to sanitation facilities. They may be using open defecation pits, which is just like it sounds. This can increase disease due to the contaminated water, soil, and direct contact with human feces. And then you get those bacterial, viral, and parasitic infections. So this is my personal opinion that sanitation is one of the most basic human needs and rights, having the ability to urinate and defecate in a safe and private manner. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Kind of an ugly subject, but one that needs to be talked about. Oops. So fuel, did I skip too many? No, I didn't. Sorry, a little scattered today. Kind of fighting a bit of a cold, so I think I've got the cough under control for now. Fuel and indoor air quality. Now, again, we have certain things that may pose a risk for us in a wealthier country, in our part of the United States. So we frequently use wood burning stoves, pellet stoves, things of that sort to warm our homes in the winter. We need that energy to cook our food, so electricity, and boil water for safe consumption, provide heat when it's cold, and provide a source of light at night. So about 25% of people globally do not have any access to electricity, and they're using solid fuels. So as I mentioned, wood, which will release toxins in the air when burned, coal, and kerosene. All of these fuels will release an air pollutant. Some of these solid fuels are often used in homes where there's poor ventilation. So again, going back to these poorly made shelters, they may be using not necessarily a wood stove, but burning wood inside that shelter to keep warm or to cook. So releasing those toxins into an unventilated area, not a great idea. So lack of electricity can also decrease availability of proper refrigeration. So we will see an increased risk of spoilage and illness. A lot of people have to rely on a block of ice if they can even do that. We in the United States, it's kind of unusual in that we have actual large, huge, if you look at other countries, we have huge refrigerators and freezers. Some countries still have to shop daily because they have a literal ice box. So they have a block of ice in a box, and that's where they keep their perishables for that day. So they go out and go to the market every single day buying what they need for food consumption that day. Also, I think we take into consideration or take for granted the ventilation systems in our homes. I'm looking at my pellet stove right now. There's a chimney, so none of the fumes get into my house. It's all released somewhat shamefully into the air outside. We have fans. I already mentioned our refrigeration. I'm curious to know, have any of you ever had to go without electricity for an extended period of time? I love sharing my personal experiences, oversharing. I was in Hawaii at the time. I still lived there during Hurricane Iniki in 1992. I was on the island that suffered the most direct hit, and we were without electricity for almost, I want to say it was almost 3 months. The hurricane happened in September, and I believe our part of the island got our electricity back in December. We didn't have phones until March, and we were without, my side of the island, I will say we were lucky. We were without water for only 3 days. We were close enough to the naval base where we were actually one of the first on the island to get fresh water back. But I would love to hear your personal experiences on anyone that's ever had to go without electricity for an extended period of time, and how you get so used to having that advantage that it is mind-boggling difficult when you don't have it. Just As an aside, I can make rice on a propane burner in the dark using my finger to measure. I still can't make rice measuring it with a cup or any kind of measuring utensil. I go by the knuckles on my finger. So if you ever want a demonstration of that, I would be happy to provide it. Because that's something I guess everyone should know in case you don't have a rice cooker. Work environment. We've got a lot of different risks that one could be exposed to. So either it's biological, chemical, physical, mechanical, psychological. The psychological aspect, I think some of us tend to overlook, but look at people like social workers. A lot of people are going into that particular field. That certainly takes a psychological toll on an individual. Biological risks. Those of you going into the nursing field, you're dealing with biohazardous materials, blood, urine, feces, saliva, at risk for exposure to different diseases, bloodborne diseases. So think about it. This particular chapter, I think, gives us a lot of room to really think about what our own situation is. So I'd like you to think about what kind of risks are you exposed to in your line of work. Right offhand, the one thing that comes to mind in my line of work is my office has a window in which I am directly in the sun for a good part of the day. So I would say my biggest risk in my line of work is probably ultraviolet rays. That sounds really weird for someone who sits in an office all day, but I'm lucky enough to have one of those sit down, stand up desks so I can stand up a good part of the time. So I'm going to say that sun exposure is my biggest risk. Love to hear what's yours. So toxins, we talked about this a little bit, and again, I am so wordy and doing these screencasts, so I'm gonna have to spend just a little bit of time on this last slide. So toxicology is the study of the harmful effects that chemicals and other environmental hazards like radiation have on living things. So our hazardous substances cause a significant number of deaths a year, and including over 100,000 of occupational deaths from asbestos and 70,000 due to poisoning from agricultural pesticides. That seems a little bit atrocious to me. Sadly, a lot of our highly toxic agents like asbestos that are banned in the US are still being used worldwide. So we have not been able to reduce some of these deaths or diseases as a result of it. So air pollution, this is a biggie. Again, a certain number of you chose this as your topic. So air pollution is caused by our car exhaust, power plants that use coal or oil, and how about this? Forest fires that can negatively affect health outcomes. So I'm going to say forest fires and wildfires. This is very timely in what we're going to be talking about next week in week 5 with our case study. But I'm hoping that this particular slideshow gave you plenty of opportunity for thought. Think about the air pollution within the Treasure Valley and how it can and does affect one's health. We do have, in addition to a high risk of skin cancer in Idaho, we also have a very high risk and incidence of asthma due to our poor air quality. Idaho, Treasure Valley, beautiful place to live, cruddy, crappy air. Anyone who has asthma, including myself, will attest to the fact that there are times in the year that it's really hard to breathe down in Boise. That's part of the reason that I actually moved up to Gardena, kind of up in the mountains. I'm about halfway between Horseshoe Bend and Banks, but it keeps me above the inversion in the wintertime. Unfortunately, I am much more likely to have the smoke in the summer because I'm closer to the forest. So with that, that is chapter 8. Please ask any questions. If you'd like to share any experiences, please do so. You guys have been fantastic so far, and I am looking forward to another great week with you. Thanks.